People ask us, how can I avoid plagiarism in my own work? Understand the context. Don't just copy paste text from a reference paper into your own work, and understand the idea of the reference source in order to paraphrase correctly. So take some time to understand your sources. And there's some great online references you can look at. Here's one from the University of Wisconsin Madison Writing Center, examples of effective paraphrasing. Of course, we can also help you at our editing company to understand this process, and that's why we present these kinds of training courses as well. And don't forget to use quotations correctly. Use quotes around text that has been taken from another paper if you don't want to rewrite it, if you don't want to paraphrase it. Identify what does and what does not need to be cited in your own work. Any words or ideas that are not your own need to be cited. Facts or common knowledge, of course, do not need to be cited. The earth is round, the sky is blue, the oxygen in the atmosphere. These are common knowledge. Of course, in your own subject area, based on your own experience, it will be important for you to check how other people are citing standard things in your own field. And of course, properly paraphrasing your work is also important. Rewording and formatting your writing in an original way to avoid using too many words and phrases from the source. Again, we can help. You can submit your work to us. We can have a look at your work to make sure that it is not plagiarized. We can also provide you with access to plagiarism checking software. Properly cite your sources. Make sure you keep records of the sources you refer to, as we've already discussed, and plagiarism checking software packages is also very important. Now, second thing I want to talk about in our presentation today, the second most common ethical issue that we encounter at our journals, at international journals, is the issue of authorship. Who should be and who should not be included as an author on your papers? This is also very common, a question of interpretation, but a rule of thumb, we'll talk about this again in a minute, is around the issue of whether contribution to a particular piece of work, a particular piece of research was substantial. And the top piece of advice in this area, in order to avoid ethical issues as you write and submit your papers to journals, is to discuss authorship when research is planned. Decide on authorship before you start writing your article, because of course this can also lead to huge problems down the road. In particular, journals see these two kinds of unethical authorship practices in articles submitted to international journals: gift authorship and ghost authorship. Gift authors are when you include authors on your papers who have not contributed significantly to the study. So maybe colleagues who need to increase their publication rate, or colleagues or people in your field who have some kind of expectation. Maybe it's a favor, maybe it's a senior colleague. They are included when they have not contributed significantly to the study. A gift authorship, as the name suggests. It's becoming increasingly important in international journal publishing for authors to be asked to present a contribution statement. What did this author actually do to contribute to the study? This is becoming more and more common to get away from this idea that you can just add people to academic papers as and when you like. The second common ethical issue in this area then is the appearance or the non-appearance of authors. Ghost authorship. Professional writers, authors who've contributed but then don't get listed on the authorship at the end of the day. And let me tell you that authorship for academic publishers, for journals, is the most common ethical issue that we have to deal with during and after publication. There are often disputes between authors. People want to be added, people want to be taken off. So think and discuss Who should be an author on your paper? Was their contribution substantial? Discuss when the research is planned. Decide on authorship and the order of authors before you start to write, so that there can be no ethical issues later and there can be no arguments later. Everyone knows and has agreed before the paper gets submitted. So collaborations, guarantors, and reviewers, these are not necessarily people who should be included as authors on academic papers. We base around the guidelines. Academic journals follow guidelines, including most famously those produced initially by the International Committee of Medical Journal Editors. Great acronym, the ICMJE. We all use these guidelines at international academic publishers. Authorship credit should be based only on, number one, substantial contributions to conception and design, acquisition of data, or analysis and interpretation. Number one. Authorship credit should be based on, number two, drafting the article or revising it critically for important intellectual content. And number three, final approval of the version to be published. Conditions 1, 2, and 3 must all be met. According to the ICMJE, these are guidelines picked up by all reputable international journals, as well as other international organizations like COPE, the Committee on Publication Ethics. These are guidelines to have a think about when deciding about your authorship in your academic articles. This is a very common situation that journals hate. We want to avoid this. I got an email the other day. Dear editor, hello. Thank you for reviewing my manuscript during your busy schedule. I have some minor modifications and I have added 2 authors. They have also contributed to my manuscript. In addition, the introduction of the corresponding author is added to facilitate communication with peers. This is a big problem. This is a big problem. Let me repeat in answer to your question. ICMJE stands for the International Committee Medical Journal Editors. They provide guidelines on authorship, what should be met in order to be an author, that all reputable international journals follow. Now, here is a case study that we often encounter at journals. We do not want to add authors to papers once articles are published or once articles are accepted, because sending a paper to a journal requires that all authors know about and support submission. Trying to add authors after acceptance causes alarm at the editorial office. And again, any changes or additions to authorship after submission require explanation and the approval of all currently listed authors. For this reason, it's so important to discuss and decide with your colleagues before you even start to write, let alone submit your next paper, who's going to be an author and what their position on the authorship is going to be. Let's talk a little bit in this context about publishing, because this is also important. We often encounter duplicate, overlapping submissions at publishing companies. We often encounter competing manuscripts. We often encounter sibling publications. To avoid ethical problems as an author, you should not be submitting your papers to more than one journal at the same time. This is called duplicate submissions. It's a big no-no. Journals will ask you when you make submissions, is this paper under consideration for another academic journal? You will sign online a declaration that says that you have not submitted your paper to another journal, yet lots of authors actually do this. Journals will not consider simultaneously submitted manuscripts. You will end up getting your paper rejected from both places that you submit to, and you will end up getting blacklisted from those publishers. Most journals don't consider simultaneously submitted manuscripts, and this is often an ethical issue that journal editors also face. We at our journal promptly reject papers if we find out that there's another submission to another journal on the same topic by the same authors, and we blacklist authors from our journals. You don't want to get onto a publishing company blacklist, because then you would find yourself unable to submit to maybe all of the journals published by one of the big publishing companies. Selecting a journal for your work is hugely important, which brings me on to the third and final topic for our webinar today on publishing ethics. Selecting a journal is important, aiming high, choosing appropriately, and learning to sell and manage your submission. But how, as an author, can you navigate all of the publishing models for scholarly journals? It's confusing, I know. Bentham Science, for example, are open access publishers predominantly, although they also publish a number of hybrid journals. We have a traditional model for publishing. Submit to a journal, you don't have to pay. That journal content is then sold on to university libraries, to individuals, and then only people who pay a subscription can access the content. That's the traditional model. But as you know, we are seeing more and more open access publishers, green, gold, platinum, delayed open access, rising the standards for journals and often charging authors for publication fees, the so-called article processing charges, the APCs. So open access journals, lots of authors want to publish in them, but how can you know that you are submitting to a journal that is not a predator, a journal that's just interested in your money? Predatory journals are those that exploit the gold open access model for their own profit. They take advantage, exploit, and pander to scholarly authors. They pretend to be legitimate, they copy established and respected journal websites, and many of them don't perform proper peer review. And so as an author, it's difficult often to understand what's a good journal, what's a reputable journal, and what is not. We can help you. If you get in touch with us, we can certainly make recommendations for journals that you could be using for your research. But keep in mind that indeed many predators are looking at making themselves as close as possible to established journals, copying the titles, copying even the editorial boards in order to convince you, the author, that it's a good idea to submit your work to that journal. In return for a fee, you'll get published quickly, often without peer review. So, is the journal that you've selected listed in a reputable international database? Is the journal that you've selected conducting peer review? Do you know any of the names, some of the names of the editors on the editorial board?